Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret history and little-known fascinating facts behind your favorite music, movies, TV shows, and more. We're two guys with too much free time on our hands. My name's Jordan Runtagh.
And I'm Alex Heigl. And Jordan, on this episode, we are turning our bloodshot eyes to the Osbournes, the reality TV lodestar that turned Ozzy Osbourne from a cocaine-addled heavy metal icon into a cuddly sitcom-esque patriarch, and foisted his wife Sharon and daughter Kelly onto an unsuspecting nation. Son Jack was also there.
Oh, love Jack.
Yeah, we'll get to Jack. I have no quarrel with him. He's fine. The show's 20th anniversary was in March, which means it's nearly twice as old as Ozzy's original tenure in Black Sabbath, which is something I find hilarious. It's how, like, Henry Rollins has been doing spoken word about being in Black Flag for, like, 7 times the amount of time he was in Black Flag. Anyway, Jordan, I cannot imagine you being a fan of this show or really of Black Sabbath in general. I was just getting into my Black Sabbath fandom when this came on. So yeah, I was poised to enjoy it. What about you?
No, I mean, back in 2002, I was tuned into TV Land watching like the actual 50s sitcoms that this show spoofed. So like the Cardigan Crowd was more my thing. I was deep into the adventures of Ozzy and Harriet rather than Ozzy Osbourne, which, I mean, does anyone get that reference? Like the Adventures of Ozzy and Harriet? Because that's actually an interesting story. They were sort of, in a weird way, the actual first reality TV family. Have you heard of them? They were a real family, and they all acted together in this sitcom that the dad produced and directed, Ozzy, and they acted on a set of their house that was like identical to their real house, and it was just like things that were happening in the real life they would just write into the show. And then they had Ricky Nelson, who's a pop singer in the 60s, like had a pop career spin-off, just like Kelly did in the Osbournes. Like it's definitely interesting. But
well, let's not tar Ricky Nelson with the same brush as, I'm sorry, I'm going to be really mean to Kelly in this episode. I don't find her charming.
Anyway, that's enough about that Ozzy. Let's get into the other Ozzy, the Prince of Darkness. Yeah, I would have never dreamed that the guy behind Crazy Train would become one of the most beloved TV personalities of our generation. It's easy to forget that there weren't really any shows at this time that did the whole like Hollywood wildlife documentary thing where they showed celebrities in their natural habitat. And in addition to the lack of these kinds of shows, this was also pre-social media. So famous people's private lives were truly private.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for people who are maybe 10 years younger than us to recall how compelling it was to just see celebrities at home doing normal stuff or like in their car or on vacation. I mean, these shows are so run-of-the-mill now that almost might seem boring, but the premise was groundbreaking on the Osbournes. And the New York Times had a review, I think it was the week that the Osbournes show premiered, and it said, most shows take nobodies and turn them into somebodies. This show took somebodies and turned them into nobodies, which is great. I mean, it's sort of like a fish out of water story about Ozzy just trying to make sense of the normal world and managing people who are asking him to do simple tasks. I mean, I went to screenwriting school. They told me that drama is conflict, and sometimes that's Hamlet, sometimes that's Sophie's Choice, and sometimes that's a man trying to figure out how to use his remote control so he can watch a World War II documentary on the History Channel. Drama comes in many forms.
Jordan!
I was going to say, before we start this episode, I really need to ask, can you scream my name like Sharon?
I used to have a really good Ozzy impression in my back pocket. I don't think I have it anymore. It's been a while. I mean, it is really funny. One of the two most formative things that I spent an ungodly amount of time watching were both on VH1. It was the 100 Greatest Artists of Hard Rock Countdown, hosted by Carmen Electra, and the Most Shocking Moments in Rock and Roll, hosted by Mark McGrath. And that came out in 2001. So like the whole thing about like Ozzy biting the head off the bat, snorting the line of ants, that was all like part of the
very
hagiography.
Vivid to you.
Yeah, and it's all part of like the received hagiography about him. But like also this wasn't like Mark Burnett or whatever. This like the people who did this kind of just came out of nowhere at MTV. It really is quite a thing. Anyway, whatever the case may be, we are going to get into the medical feasibility of snorting that line of ants. Sharon's whatever she's been up to lately, whatever you can call that. and the curiously high amount of dollars that several pairs of Ozzy's wider rim glasses sold at auction in 2007.
And there's the flying ham.
Oh, yes. And how could we forget Hamgate? Here's everything you didn't know about the Osbournes. So, we touched on this seconds earlier, but there were not a ton of shows that brought you into the celebrity world. Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous is probably the easiest analog that you could get into, but it was actually an episode of MTV's Cribs 2 years before the Osbournes' 2002 launch that was kind of their soft audition for the show. You know, by 2000, Ozzy hadn't put out an album since Osmosis in 1995. The man has a truly stellar track record of naming records after his names, just different Oz puns. Gotta love him.
Blizzard of Oz is the best one, I think.
It's good. It's good. So as we mentioned, the most you'd see of Ozzy around this time was either at Ozfest each year, where they would trot him out to do the Sabbath and the solo stuff with a rotating cast of much younger musicians, including pre-Metallica bassist Rob Trujillo at one point, or on some VH1 special about him biting the head off the bat, snorting the line of ants, or drinking his own urine, or
urinating on the Alamo. Don't forget that.
Yes, another favorite thing. The ant thing, let's just get this out of the way immediately, comes from the members of Motley Crue, who wrote about it in The Dirt, which is their famous garbage book. Yeah, garbage book about them being garbage people and a garbage band. They've stood by it. Ozzy, perhaps obviously, says he has no memory of it. And his guitar player, one of his guitarists, Jakey Lee, who's obviously just a fantastic shredder guitarist, he said in 2019, "I was there and I never saw ants. He snorted a little spider."
Still bad.
Yeah, still weird, but not as bad as a line of ants. "I don't care what the other guys say. There was no ants." So,
just on the flip side of that, Ozzy also says that he has no memory of the birth of his first two kids. So it could have happened, and he also could have genuinely not remembered it. But
we have a lot of unreliable narrators on this show, from like Robert Plant and Jimmy Page to a lot of unreliable narrators. But Ozzy may be the most unreliable. Anyway, the Osbournes opened their home to Cribs in September of 2000. And do you know who the other guests on that episode were, Jordan?
No, who?
Moby and Jewel.
That's very 2000.
Yeah,
that's
super
insanely 2000.
So Kelly, during that episode, famously outs Ozzy as a Britney Spears and NSYNC fan. And, there's been two great oral histories of this show that came out this year. The Ringer did one of them. And Jack told them that whenever the network did anything on Ozfest, which is Ozzy's annual or semi-annual, I have no idea. It's like his heavy metal music fest. Whenever MTV would do anything on it, Jack and Kelly were always like kind of the faces of it. And so he called that Cribs episode a second audition reel. We're going to get into a lot
Jack and Kelly are like Ozzy's like representatives here on Earth.
Yeah, his avatars. Yeah. There's a lot of kind of no-name producers in here, all due respect to them. So we're going to be naming a lot of people. So take notes, people. Producer Greg Johnston, who had kicked around MTV for a few years prior, doing stuff like Buzzkill and Pauly Shore's show, Totally Pauly. I have zero memory. Much like Ozzy and the birth of his children, I have no memory of that show. Based on Jack and Kelly and their wild, off-the-charts chemistry on camera, I guess they were tapping them for VJ opportunities. But he took a lunch with Sharon at one point, and she was just telling stories about, she's been in show business for forever. She took over Ozzy's career and really gave him his second of like 3 acts. So she was just telling all these stories, and, he was like, wait a second.
The producers are eating out of the palm of her hand. She's telling all these wild stories about like just misadventures that Ozzy gets up to around the house and stuff. And I guess over the course of this lunch, she kind of semi-comically moaned, "God, I keep telling people these stories and people don't ever believe half the stories I tell them. I need proof." And that kind of sparked the brainwave with, wait a minute,
Bing!
Let's get this on camera.
So there's another producer named Jeff Stilson, who is formerly of the Chris Rock Show.
Oh, wow.
He traces the inspiration to this to a BBC documentary called Fame and Fortune that featured the Osbournes.
There's a clip of it on
seen
YouTube.
this?
It's fun. Yeah. It definitely seems like a soft launch of the Osbournes. Like there's a scene of them all eating dinner around the table and they're singing Monty Python's Always Look on the Bright Side of Life and cursing at one another. And little Kelly's like scolding her father. Like, we shouldn't be using that language at the dinner table. Like, it's very sweet.
We just spent the entire intro to the show talking about how we didn't see Ozzy as this kind of character, but have you ever seen Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, the hair metal years?
No.
There's footage of Ozzy like puttering around the kitchen in a bathrobe, fixing eggs and like making breakfast. So he really has always been this person. It's just a matter of whether or not, how many cameras were there or not.
Yeah, he got his platform.
Yeah. 50 years into his career, he finally got his platform. Another producer, Lois Curran, had also worked on The Dating Game. So quite an interesting collection of people kind of talent converging on this show.
A motley crew, if you will.
Get
I just want to give a quick shout out to Sharon Osbourne. You touched on this earlier, but she was just instrumental in putting all this together and in so many of the Osbourne family business dealings. And she's very much the business brains in this family. And it's in her blood because her dad was actually Ozzy's manager in Black Sabbath, a guy called Don Arden, who is one of the most notorious music business heavies of all time. He's been called the Al Capone of pop, the English Godfather, and most vaguely, but perhaps most terrifyingly, Mr. Big. And I don't want to know how he got that nickname. His business practices, if you could even call it that, are legendary. I mean, back in the 60s, he bribed the people who published music charts to place his acts higher on the charts. When one of his acts complained about unpaid royalties, he replied, "I have the strength of 10 men in these hands," and threatened to throw him out of a window. The British group, the Small Faces, which later morphed into Rod Stewart's group, the Faces, they tried to get a new manager. Don Arden didn't like this. He went to this new manager and either threatened or some say did dangle this guy by his ankles out of a window. I mean, so this guy's basically Suge Knight 30 years early.
Wild.
And Sharon is his daughter, which is how she met Ozzy. Weird side note, before they dated, she dated Jay Leno.
Ew.
Like Comedy Store era Jay Leno. Can you imagine what I want, like a butterfly effect about what like the world would be totally different.
I don't want to imagine that world, frankly.
I mean, what if Jay Leno fronted Black Sabbath through a connection to Sharon? I mean,
Jesus Christ.
So when Black Sabbath, who Sharon's dad managed, fired Ozzy in 1979, Sharon took over as Ozzy's manager, and they also began a relationship. And her dad, Don Arden, was furious, and the next time she visited, pregnant, he supposedly sicked his dogs on her, and she was mauled and lost the baby.
That is insane.
It's gothic. So Sharon then took Ozzy's contract to an American label, and her own father, sued her for $1 million in damages for going against him. And they didn't speak for 20 years. And in 2001, Sharon told The Guardian, "He taught me everything not to do in business. My father's never seen any of my 3 kids, and as far as I'm concerned, he never will." Later that same year, I guess, at Ozzy's insistence, Sharon and her dad reconciled, and he took a walk-on role on the Osbournes. And he met, finally, Jack and Kelly for the first time, who by this point were like almost in their 20s. But by this time, Don Arden was no longer the feared music manager of old. He was beginning to succumb to Alzheimer's, and he died in 2007. So a seriously fierce guy. And he passed that ferocity on to his daughter Sharon, and hence she ruled over the Osbournes TV production with a iron fist, but a benevolent iron fist.
Yeah, so again, it can't be underscored enough how little rulebook there was for reality TV at this point. I mean, I don't even know if reality TV was like the accepted term for it. I mean,
I don't think it existed then. They thought of this really as a documentary sitcom, was the sort of the phrase that they used.
Jack said the only reference we had for reality TV at the time was The Real World, Road Rules, Cops, which now I'm imagining like either the Ozzy version of Bad Boys or Crazy Train done in the style of the reggae band who did Cops. One of the things that they were worried about was conversations around Ozzy's sobriety making it onto the air. But regardless, Johnston started shooting basic footage in the summer of 2001 and moved the production team into the house in October. same year.
Yeah, the Osbournes were in the midst of moving houses anyway, so producers thought this was like a great starting point for the show, this new beginning in their new home. They toured the house with Sharon and asked if they could set up a control room in an old maid's quarters. And to their shock, she was fine with it and agreed. And it was generally thought that they'd be hanging around for like a couple weeks, like Sharon said, maybe 3 weeks tops. But 3 years later, they were still there, filming at some points up to 18 hours a day. And the crew members would liken it to filming a wildlife documentary. It's really, really insane to think now how this was shot. The amount of time the producers had at their disposal is just absolutely mind-boggling because Sharon was an executive producer. So there was kind of a certain sense of safety there from with the family's perspective that, nothing truly that horrible would make it to air because they would have final say.
I shudder to think at the NDAs that were drawn up for this.
Yes. Oh yeah. There were a few off-limits rooms in the house. I think like Ozzy's home theater room or something was one of them.
Yeah.
You'd go to like hang out, and there are a few others. But the crew shot 6 days a week for about between 16 and 18 hours a day, and they had cameras in nearly every room in the house, and they had 1 or 2 cameras following each, I guess you'd call them principal cast member, each family member. They had someone sleeping in the guest room at the Osbournes' house overnight in case something happened, which is how the famous ham throwing incident was preserved for posterity. We'll get to that. They even had a few spy cameras in some of the rooms. So if something started brewing in like one of the key public spaces of the house, they could kind of get wind of it and get their cameras in position. So by the end of this, they had thousands of hours of footage to cull through for any given episode, which is just insane. I mean, they've said that on average, they would have about 10 days worth of footage to make one single 30-minute episode, which would drive you insane now. I mean, but remember, the original premise was basically real world Ozzy Osbourne. And the premise kind of diverged from that pretty quickly. Some of the producers for the Osbourne show were friends with the Real World team, and so they called them up and asked them how they shot the show and kind of took notes and got some advice for how to shoot a people documentary, basically, a wildlife people documentary. And there were really 2 key differences between how the Real World was shot and how the Osbournes were shot. First of all, in the Real World, the camera crew has really strict instructions not to speak to any of the castmates. And this wasn't going to work on the Osbournes. I mean, you're guests in this family's house, so some kind of interplay and interaction is required. It'd be weird if you didn't acknowledge them and say hi. The Osbourne producers also diverged from the Real World by eliminating any talking head segments. So, instead of having the cast give confessionals, they approached the show as, in their words, a documentary sitcom where the story was moved along just by the footage. No narration, no retrospective insight, no confessionals, no asides. It was an unscripted sitcom, straight up. I mean, the term reality TV, as we said earlier, hadn't really been invented yet, or if it had, it wasn't in wide usage. So to the producers, this was a documentary sitcom.
Yeah, and MTV didn't know what to do.
Ever.
Well, yeah, by this point, it's kind of calcified into an institution that did not seem to know what it was doing. But yeah, there were some early battles, and after those happened, production just kind of got to do what it wanted. And some of the examples of battles that they would have was like MTV, typical like exec thinking was like, well, this is about the Osbournes, so we got to have like current heavy metal playing under it. So they, I think Stilson or Johnston talks about like seeing dailies where they had like Linkin Park playing under this footage, which is such a miss by miles.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what made this show work was that it was a faux 50s sitcom. I mean,
yeah.
I think of the first episode, wasn't there like a title on the screen that said like, here, welcome the perfect American family or something like that. It was that like perfect sarcasm, but instead of Ward Cleaver and all that Father Knows Best stuff, you had Ozzy. So the whole idea of playing heavy metal underneath this just totally destroyed what was so special about the show, the playfulness and the humor.
And I guess it kind of got fraught at one point, but they basically said like after they won that battle, MTV's backed off, at least presumably until the show was a huge hit and they decided to get their claws back into it. But the funniest thing about this to me is that, I mean, this is, I guess, kind of well known in the metal community or heavy music community, is that Ozzy is not the wild man that he, seems to be, or that VH1 would have you believe. He's a shy, unassuming, sweet young man from England.
From Birmingham, yes.
From Birmingham. And he was shy of cameras, and so producer Jonathan Taylor, JT, told Vice in their own oral history from this year, in the early days, it was tough to get Ozzy. He was very shy when we started filming. In the first week or so of filming, we didn't see much of him. So as you mentioned earlier, one of the places that was off limits was his sort of like media lounge, which I guess he used for working on music and also screening movies, and he would just disappear in there for hours. His other workaround was to stroll into the control room that they had set up and just talk to the crew whenever he didn't want to be filmed.
I mean, that's really smart. It would break the illusion to like actually turn the cameras on the camera people. I mean, this all makes sense because Ozzy's the only one of his entire family that has a reputation, and a huge one. He has a lot to lose because no one could be sure if it would make him, into this lovable pop cultural figure or just totally destroy his rock and roll credibility and the mystique that he'd been cultivating for 30 plus years. So it makes sense that he was probably the most reluctant at the start to actually go along with all this. And he later said that he regretted it. There was an interview that he gave to the NME in 2013 where he said, sprinkle an F-bomb in between every other word here. Of course I regret doing the show. I didn't want to be on television. I didn't become a rock and roll singer to read the weather forecast. Know what I mean?
And the rest of the family just kind of adapted, I think, on the fly, maybe a little bit better to him. Sharon told The Ringer, she was like, at first you're like, oh dear, a camera. I must get myself dressed, and this, that, the other. And then after 2 weeks, you're just like, fuck it, I'm going down in my pajamas. I don't give a shit. This is going to be a hard one to sell ads for. All of these people use the F word very liberally, as they well should.
The funny thing about that, apparently, I think Jack and Kelly have said that their parents didn't swear anywhere near as much around them before the show started taping. And I mean, there's two schools of thought on that. You could say that they started playing into their larger than life TV personas, or just that the kids had reached a certain age, they were in their late teens at this point where like the parents no longer had to like be careful what they said around them. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and Jack, he said he didn't like being filmed while he was eating or first thing in the morning, both of which seem eminently reasonable, and that he learned the now time-honored reality TV show hack of ruining the audio feed whenever you don't want something used. So the thing that a lot of people do, I don't know if this is coming across, is like the ASMR thing where you like scratch the microphone cover or you clap into it. The other thing you can do is if you have a lav mic, you tap the lav mic while you're talking, so they can't use any of that.
I never heard about any of that. I know that when the Beatles were making the Get Back documentary that Peter Jackson just cut together, whenever they were having private conversations they didn't want on camera, they would strum noisily on their guitars as loud as they could. And then Peter Jackson finally like developed technology to be able to strip that away and actually hear what they were saying. But,
and he would.
Yes.
And he would. Jack's other move was to just cover up his camera with a towel when he was smoking pot or different friends were visiting. The list of like celebrities, let's do a lightning round. The list of celebrities who appeared on the Osbournes is really wild. The fact that Mandy Moore was one of his buddies, same with Elijah Wood.
Did they date or were they just buddies? Which is weird.
I mean, all right. No disrespect to Jack Osbourne, but it would
surprise me. I mean, he's a charming young man.
No, it wouldn't. It would jibe with Mandy Moore dating downwards.
Okay.
Which she famously did for like a decade with Ryan Adams. But anyway, Elijah Wood is funnier to me, but whatever.
Oh, this is like Lord of the Rings era, right? Speaking of Peter Jackson.
Oh, yeah. He would have been on top of the world at this point. Maybe he just went over to get high with Jack and escape the pressures of being Frodo. Anyway, continue.
These are a little more left of center. We got Roy Orbison's son was apparently over a lot. And for a while, I guess Jack Osbourne dated Kurt Cobain's half-sister.
I have no idea who that would be.
I don't know. I read that somewhere and I want to believe it just for novelty value. Who else we got? Then there was the whole like Dancing with Christina Aguilera thing, because there was like a famous fight on the show between Kelly and Jack where she was mad at him for dancing with Christina Aguilera, and I guess they had some kind of feud. I don't know.
I love the idea of Christina Aguilera being like that divisive of a figure in the Osbournes. Like she was the line you do not cross.
Oh, she's like irate in this clip. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe they were friends. Kelly and Christina were friends, and she didn't want like her brother dating her friend. I don't know what it was, but there's this like fairly famous moment when they're like screaming at each other.
I just found that one of the wildest things that I missed researching this.
What's that?
Do you know that Christina Aguilera bought this house?
When? Like, was she the person who bought it after the Osbournes moved out?
I just saw this on Twitter that she bought it and turned Kelly's bedroom into a shoe closet, which is...
Okay, so there's something there. We have struck a nerve.
The single most... That's up there with I don't know her. That is so apex petty. I love it. Yeah, so at some point she bought it and then tried to unload it in the middle of her divorce. Yeah, she sold for, let's see, 11.5, which is $2 million less than the asking price. So, yeah, do with that what you will.
Damn. So Christina was around, and just like the crew would tell these stories about hearing beautiful piano being played in the other room, and they'd walk in and find Elton John, which is like just a day at the office for them. I mean, all these guests made for great TV, but the downside was you had to like get them to sign off on all this stuff at the last minute, like get them to sign releases and everything. But it actually wasn't that hard because, well, two reasons. A lot of people in Hollywood knew that the Osbournes' house was a live set, so they kind of knew what they were getting into when they went there. And a lot of, reality TV was so new that celebrities were pretty naive about it all and just were like, all right, no, guess I'm going to be on camera. That's cool.
Can you imagine a time?
Nah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we touched speaking of Motley Crue earlier. Did you know that Motley Crue used to babysit the Osbourne kids in like the late 80s?
I don't. My knee-jerk reaction is to be horrified, but it's much, much funnier if one of them is like a CPR-trained caregiver. He comes over and he's got his hair up in like a loose bun and he's wearing like reading glasses and he's like, all right, kids, in bed by 7, no TV, no screens, no screen time after 8. There's that other famous moment where Jack is basically trying to, Jack was he was a teenager. I'm surprised much worse things didn't come out with this show. He's a teenage boy who is growing up wealthy in LA. I'm sure they dodged many bullets. Bullets if they're lucky. I was waiting for that one to land. Anyway, Jack tries to get this moment where he's chasing a buddy's girl cut from the show, but Sharon, because she's a true professional, she says, sorry, Jack, we made an agreement. Maybe next time you won't try to your best friend's girl.
That's
she's
good parenting. That's good parenting.
Yeah. You took the money, Jack. This is the business we've chosen.
On the flip side of that, one of the producers, Jonathan J.T. Taylor, tells a great story in the Vice oral history about a moment early on in the production when Jack and Kelly were fighting, and it seemed way too real to get this on camera, so the camera crew lowered their lenses and kind of quietly left the room. And the next day, Jack said, wait, why'd you turn the cameras off? So he kind of knew the deal, too.
He's gone on to produce stuff and work on television. He had the instincts early on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he later said that the development for the Osbourne show was so drawn out that he sort of had forgotten about it by the time it was time to start shooting. Like, he had gone off with his dad for one of the Ozfest tours that summer. So then he gets home and he's gearing up to start high school, and people start talking about a camera crew moving into his house, and he's totally freaked out. He's like, wait a minute, that's actually happening? Which, I mean, I feel bad for the guy in that sense. I mean, can you imagine dealing with all that as you're starting high school?
I truly cannot. So just as Jack was funniest and most filmable when he was being a weird, horny, withdrawn heavy metal teen, Ozzy, as everyone agrees, is most magnetic when he's just puttering around being a dad. If there's one thing other than Hamgate that this show has lodged in the popular consciousness, it is the bubble machine incident when Sharon is pitching him new stage props or whatever for his tour, and he says, Bubbles, Sharon, I'm the Prince of Darkness, which is so funny and so perfect. But everyone in production seems like weirdly protective of him also, and just have the most
Wouldn't
adorable... You be? I would, yeah. Oh my God. I'd be like, protect Ozzy at all costs. Yeah, different reminiscences include him kind of puttering around the house in a cast, looking for the cat because he was worried it would be attacked by coyotes, stepping in dog poop, being annoyed by the vacuum cleaner, trying to work out the remote so he could watch documentaries about World War II. In one of the oral histories, forgive me, I'm forgetting which one it is, but there was a cut scene where Ozzy is getting a massage and becoming very like increasingly agitated with it, and the masseuse is like trying to talk him down and be like, okay, like, you know, whatever.
Relax.
However,
That's how they always talk to me on the rare occasions I get a massage, because I can't relax and I hate getting a massage. So yeah, I know exactly what he was probably told.
Yeah, and so there's a director named Donald Bull who recalled that after that scene, Ozzy came up to him and was like, Donald, that woman's breath smelled like a shit sandwich. I couldn't stand it. But he was still too nice to be like, I am a world famous rock star. I should not have to put up with this.
Get me another masseuse.
Yeah, stop touching me. Get out of here. Because he's just a sweet boy from Birmingham. And having said all that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information right after this.
So Ozzy having the worst massage of his life was not the only thing the producers cut from the Osbournes.
They also cut an entire sentient, living, breathing human being. Several, actually. At least one of them of her own volition. Anyway, as listeners may or may not be aware of, there are other Osbourne siblings other than Jack and Kelly. And the show did leave in quite a bit, like Sharon's battle with breast cancer, but they cut out a ton. They cut out Kelly's dealing with drugs and alcohol. She was in trouble with pill addictions and drinking. Ozzy being extremely high on camera. And the eldest Osbourne child, Amy, at this point was trying to launch her own career as a musician. And this sweet summer child said, I don't want to capitalize on my family's name. I want to go out on my own. She later released her own music under ARO, which are initials, rather than trying to capitalize on the family name. And apparently this got so far as to they cut different versions of the episodes together, that some had her in them and some didn't because she was so on the fence about participating in it.
That's weird that they didn't have, a definitive. I'm surprised that they went through all that trouble to cut both versions, because that's a whole lot of headaches. And I guess they had to do a whole lot of recuts, like at the very last minute, to basically not have her in it as much as possible. And on the rare occasions that she was in it, she was blurred out. But she did have pretty solid reasons for not wanting to get into the ring on this circus. She gave an interview, I think it was to The Independent, in 2015. She said, I always really valued my privacy within that family. And for me personally, morally, and also just to give myself a chance to actually develop into a human being as opposed to just being remembered for being a teenager, it didn't really line up with what I saw for my future. Which, I mean, fair.
Given what, like, the way that reality TV stardom and like influencer culture has developed in the intervening 20 years, she seems like
a sage.
Like a Knights Templar, like like Elliot Ness, like untouchably morally upright and pure. But unsurprisingly to the rest of the family, who were all trying to get that bag, this caused some rifts. Mum was hurt, and we definitely had a tough time, she said at one point. And one of the show's editors, Greg Nash, told The Ringer, she was living at the house for many of the years that we made the show, and we kept thinking, oh, she'll come around. He said, it's just so funny how much she did not want any of that. She thought appearing on the show would ruin her music career, which is funny because she probably had a better voice than Kelly, and Kelly's career took off because of the show.
That is a quote from one of the show's editors, Greg Nash, and not you editorializing. But
it also is
yes.
me. Yes, it's also me editorializing. But go ahead. This Amy thing keeps going.
Yeah, this is really sad. I guess the production of the show actually drove Amy, the oldest of Sharon and Ozzy's 3 children, to leave the family home. During an episode of The Talk in 2018, Sharon said that Amy moved out in her late teens, specifically because they were filming the Osbourne show, and she just didn't want to be any part of it. And Sharon said, I know that my eldest girl, Amy, left home at 16, and she couldn't live in our house because we were filming, and it drove her insane. She felt, too, that she didn't want to grow up on camera. She hated the idea. It was appalling to her. So she left at 16, and I regret every day that she did. She was happy, but it broke my heart when she moved. Aww. But apparently there was even more drama once she moved out between Amy and the rest of the Osbournes as a result of the show, which is really unfortunate. Speaking again to The Independent in 2015, Amy said that the Osbourne show was, quote, very silly, which is true, and said that her parents' behavior on camera made her uncomfortable, which is sad. She also admitted that she doesn't have a strong bond with either of her siblings. I wouldn't say there's an ease between us, but there's an acceptance. Do we socialize? No, she said.
That is a grim 3-clause sentence. Like, no ease, but an acceptance. Do we see each other? No.
Yeah, that's up there with like Hemingway's short story,
for sale baby shoes
never worn. Yeah, that's chilly.
There are other Osbournes still. There are half siblings named Louis John and I did not know this, Jessica Starshine. From a previous marriage.
That Ozzy forgot, remember?
Yeah. Stepbrother named Elliot. And then there's Jordan and I have been giggling for the past 5 minutes over whether or not to refer to this person as a man or a boy, because he's a man now, but he was a minor when he was on the show. He's like a friend of the family. This woman died of colon cancer, and Ozzy and Sharon promised her on her deathbed that they would take care of him. His name is Robert Mercado. And they basically took him in. And Sharon told ABC in 2002, he is the only normal person
in that house. That's absolutely true. I read that after a stint in acting school, I read that he moved back with his father in Rhode Island in 2008, and he's been out of contact with the Osbournes for a while. I think that I don't know what the latest is with him. And from Robert Mercado, that brings us to Ham. Like so many episodes of this show, we come to our segment on Ham.
In 2002, the Osbournes were at a crossroads that involved ham. The word ham to me is so intrinsically, comedically hilarious. I'm going to be leaning on that a lot going forward.
Expand on that for a moment. I'd like to hear why.
As most things do, it comes back to my dad, who one of the weird, disgusting Pennsylvania trash foods that he likes eating is ham salad, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's ham, mayo, and if you're feeling spicy, some relish. It's disgusting, and he makes it and like eats it by the tub whenever there's a leftover Christmas ham or whatever. And it's just like a joke with my sister and I. Just the phrase ham salad, even over text, just like sends us into paroxysms of laughter. Anyway, viewers will recall that the Osbournes had a feud with their neighbor, who we will get to in a moment. This escalated to the point that you alluded to earlier, during which late at night, when there was apparently like one guy working the Osbournes graveyard shift, Sharon chucked a leftover Christmas ham over their shared fence to retaliate for the noise.
What were they doing? Was it just like loud music or a party?
Yeah,
or what?
so I think we talk about this a little later, but this guy was like listening to playback of like his new, it was another musician. And so they were listening to playback or they were listening to music. It was loud in the backyard. The Osbournes took umbrage. Things escalated to the point where they were just chucking detritus from their house over the fence. Sharon famously throws a ham. There is one part that does not make it to air. Ozzy pulled a log out of their fire pit and chucks it over.
Still flaming, right?
Yeah, while it was still smoldering or on fire. And when he saw the test footage, production had added like a cartoon, like, this is why we need a soundboard is for stuff like this. Production had added like a cartoon, like glass shattering effect to the, after he throws the log. And he was very concerned that he had actually broken one of their windows. And he was like, oh my God, they have children. They could call the police, blah, blah, blah. And production was like, that wasn't real. Sorry.
Oh, sweet Birmingham boy Ozzy. Like, again, this gets back to him being like, we need to protect him.
Yes, protect Ozzy at all costs. I mean, it is a little cruel for production to be playing with the perception of reality of someone who did acid for so many years as Ozzy did. Like, maybe he's not the guy you want to be, like, literally toying with the fabric of his reality. But the Osbournes' neighbors. I'm a little shocked it took us this long to get to this. One of them is Pat Boone. Easy listening icon Pat Boone. Not the man on the receiving end of Sharon's ham. But Indeed, one of their neighbors, and he told People magazine in 2002 that he had never had any problems with the Osbournes. He said any loud music that was coming on was usually from the kids, wasn't really Sharon or Ozzy's doing. And I love this so much. This puts a perfect picture in my mind. He says his fondest memory of being their neighbor was riding bikes with Sharon through Beverly Hills on the sidewalks, and she's towing Ozzy behind her in a wagon because of his balance problem.
Like a toddler.
Yes, like a toddler or a dog. But the other neighbor, the target of the ham, which is my favorite Thomas Harris novel.
I mean, that's going to be your next EP, The Target of the Ham.
The target of the hams. Moving on, the other neighbor, the target of the ham, was Greg Owen. I did not recognize this name. He had a big hit in '86 called My Favorite Waste of Time. And he told Heat magazine in 2002 that we were having a sing-song, which already I hate him because he said that. We were having a sing-song of my new material in the back of my garden when Ozzy claimed I was playing it too loud. Next minute, he started firing stuff over the wall. Sharon's even wilder than he is, which, yet, duh. He sold the house in 2006. But
the year the Osbournes went off the air, he should have stuck it out.
There's a wild conspiracy. was his participation in the show simply
jack up the real estate value?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
But he should have been counting his blessings, because Sharon told The Guardian in 2006 that one of her favorite moves after getting into a fight with someone was to mail the offending party a Tiffany's box, the distinctive, iconic, bright blue box that she had filled with her own poop.
These people, Jesus Christ! I mean, these people really are vicious. You do not want to get on the wrong side of these people. I mean, there's a famous tabloid story after Ozzy admitted to cheating on Sharon in like 2016, 2017 with a stylist named Michelle Pugh. Kelly basically doxed this woman by tweeting out her private phone number. So, yes, you don't want to piss these people off.
Yeah, that was real life. Some things about the show were not. I did not prepare any segues in advance of this, so you're getting tail end of a work. You're getting tail end of a workday segues from me. 20 years later, we know reality TV is mostly horseshit, but when the show ended in 2006, Jack and Kelly talked to ABC, and they really sort of blew the doors wide open on it. They were like, so much of this was put together by MTV, particularly their famous meeting with a dog therapist, which Jack squarely said that was an MTV thing. Kelly added, I put that in my contract that I will not do anything like that. F***ing dog therapist. Anyway, first season in the books, the show is a hit. It didn't just launch the careers of the Osbourne children, but it blew the doors wide open on reality TV. According to the LA Times, writing about Nielsen ratings, in July 2002, the Osbournes wound up as the highest rated cable series in MTV's 20-year history, averaging 5.3 million viewers during the first season and peaking at 7.2 million viewers in the season finale. Producer Nash told The Ringer, the episode we did with professional skateboarder Jason Dill, when that aired, 24% of 18 to 54-year-olds that owned TV sets were tuned in that night. Fully a quarter of the country's main demographic was watching that show. One of the figures that I found was the family signed a $7 million agreement with Miramax for DVD video rights. They won an Emmy, Primetime Emmy in 2002. The second season premiere pooled 6.6 million viewers, which was up 84% of the first. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that TV execs pleasure themselves over.
I mean, these days, how many Big Bang Theories is that right now? I mean, that's insane numbers.
What is that in episodes of Young Sheldon?
Right.
Adjusted for inflation. But,
But it wasn't all flying hams and...
What hams come up must come down. But pigs wouldn't always fly for the Osbournes. Just take what you want. We're spinning gold here. Everything changed big time once the show aired, Jack told The Ringer. It was really difficult to have a high school life, and that's why I dropped out. I just said I'm going to go work in TV, which he did, because school became a hindrance. And again, we mentioned this was sort of the Wild West for reality TV. The family also became guinea pigs, essentially, for a new area of media-aided celebrity stalking. Jack talks about how people would pause the show and zoom in and see phone numbers that he had written down on notepads. People gave out his AOL Instant Messenger handle, which is an extremely dated reference. He said he had to change his phone number every 6 months. And, the star maps, the maps to the homes of the stars, things that they have in LA, the Osbournes house was quickly added to one of those. Sharon said there were people outside our house every day. It was like living in Disneyland. And you mentioned earlier that their house was under construction when they started, so they didn't have a wall in their front yard, so they quickly had to add a wall to the front side of their property. And Johnson said that became a source of entertainment for them too, because Ozzy had them add a sprinkler system that he could control remotely, so when people were trying to take pictures, he would squirt them with water and laugh, which is adorable. Again, Ozzy, sweet boy from Birmingham, we must protect him at all costs. And one of my other favorite celebrity anecdotes for this, Jack talks about being at the Emmys, and he says Brad Pitt came up to him. He says, quote, "I was like 16 in the green room and just eating some celery, and he walks up to me. He's like, hey, man, me and Jen," because he was married to Jennifer Aniston at the time, "me and Jen watch you guys every night in bed. We had our agents get us all the episodes. Stars, they're just like us."
But the first season was a high water mark that would not be reached again because, the Osbournes, as much as they ever were anonymous, now were really not anonymous. None of them were. I mean, they couldn't really go anywhere. I think Sharon tells this really kind of adorable story about how, I guess, they used to go as a family to a drum circle in Venice Beach. And they went I think a week after the first episode aired, there was just only one episode out. And as they were walking down Venice Beach, all of a sudden everybody's just turning and recognized them from this TV show. And they knew that things were going to be really different from them after that. I think that was the moment when they realized that, this was something that was going to be life-changing. And for season 2, they were no longer naive, I mean, they knew how the show would be cut together, and so they were a little more self-aware, which, kind of spoiled the magic.
I love the idea that in the biopic of the Osbournes, the moment when they lose their innocence is being not able to participate in a drum circle in Venice Beach anonymously. It's set to Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings to indicate the loss of innocence, and you see Kelly sadly carting her djembe away.
Jack just lackluster.
Yeah,
banging.
Pounding a talking drum, just all the color draining from their face. Anyway, where's Peter Jackson on that?
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment. A series of, I can't even call them misfortunes, true tragedies befell the family in this period.
Bad
Yeah, truly. Sharon was diagnosed with colon cancer, which the show handled in an honest and respectful manner. Sharon was very open about the diagnosis, but she picked up on the sense that the producers were treading lightly so that it didn't seem like they were exploiting this family crisis for ratings. She later said, "There was so much stuff they didn't show with that. I think they thought it was too much, but it didn't worry me because so many people get cancer. It would have been something for younger kids to see that it's not a death sentence, that people do come out of it," which I thought was a cool take on it. So she really wanted to be very open about her battle. It's thought that the stress of Sharon's health scare contributed to Ozzy's relapse during the second season of the show after many years sober. And what's worse, it's thought that the strain of this family trauma exacerbated Jack and Kelly's burgeoning drug use. Kelly had, I guess, been prescribed Vicodin after she got her tonsils out at age 13, and this ballooned into a serious dependency. And by her own admission, she was taking up to 50 pills a day and sought treatment. And Jack did as well for an addiction to Oxycontin. He sought treatment in 2003 as a very young man. I think he was 17 or 18. And he's been sober ever since. In fact, I think they both have. So good for both of them.
Yeah, I mean, Stilson told Vice that when Sharon got cancer, Ozzy started using again, and then the family became dysfunctional. It was kind of tragic at a certain point when Ozzy was clearly taking drugs, and the family kind of broke down as a result. We should have stopped after season 1. It was 10 great episodes. Nash kind of echoes that. He said Ozzy was having a little bit more trouble with either mismedication, which is a generous euphemism, or drinking, or some combo of both. And we just weren't finding the comic gems, which is a pretty cold way of assessing that situation.
Yeah, not to totally excuse Ozzy's behavior, but I guess he'd fallen in with a doctor who was somewhat indulgent, another euphemism there. There was a Beverly Hills internist called Dr. Kipper. Is that vague enough that we won't get sued if I just call him Dr. Kipper? And Ozzy was seeing him for substance abuse issues, of all things. And this Dr. Kipper was later investigated for overprescribing medications to his famous clientele. And Ozzy's claimed that during filming of the Osbournes, Dr. Kipper provided him with up to 13 different medications at once, which led to him consuming 42 pills a day, which included Valium, Dexedrine, and Adderall, among numerous others. Ozzy later said during the filming of the later episodes of the series, quote, "I was wiped out on pills. I couldn't talk. I couldn't walk. I could barely stand up. I was lumbering about like the hunchback of Notre Dame. It got to the point where I was scared to close my eyes at night. I was afraid I might not wake up." And an investigation on this, Dr. Kipper revealed that he wasn't even certified in the medical field that he practiced. So I would imagine that he got shut down real quick, but poor Ozzy.
Man, you stop even like having a scale of like that amount of drug taking. What do they tell you to not take more than like 2 Ativan or Oxys or that stuff in a day? 42. I mean, even grading on a curve for Ozzy, is that like a half pound of pills that you like could hold in your, like those, you see those sugar cube pyramids they make for like the content of like a Coke? What does 42 pills look like in a human being's hand?
I was just thinking of Mike and Ike's, but
and you
yeah,
would.
I mean, that's a lot.
Briefly, we talked about like the Miramax deal that was like a $7 million payday for home video distribution rights, but money was a big factor in pushing this show forward. And Kelly
was pretty vocal about this.
So I want to say admirably. Kelly admitted, perhaps admirably, her reasons for doing the show to ABC in 2006. "I'm not afraid to say I only did this for the money. Because after this, I get to buy my own house, I get to move out, and I get to do what I want without having to live off my parents, and I think that's the most gratifying thing ever." All right, so I take back what I said. That's good for her. She wanted to get off the teat. And what money there was, Jordan. Oh, such riches for the Osbournes. This is really sad. $5,000 per episode in season 1.
That's crazy.
That's not even property taxes on that house.
That's a business deal from Don Arden's daughter. Don Arden would be dangling people out of windows by their ankles if somebody came back with him with that kind of money.
He was rolling over in hell. But they quickly rectified that because they made $20 million for 40 more episodes, according to the LA Times. We talked about the Miramax distribution deal, Kelly's music career, such as it was. But while we're talking about Osbourne's money, we have to talk about the Julian's auction. There were 6 pairs of Ozzy's wire rim glasses that were sold at this one auction. There was a set of 2, 4 were sold separately. Jordan, let's do a quick lightning round. Let's do some Price is Right style. Closest without going over, what do you think Ozzy's wire rim glasses sold for? Let's do the separate one before we do the set.
Were they tinted with blue?
Does not specify.
Okay. I'm going to say 4,500.
Ooh, so far over.
Oh, really?
Well, not actually. This is so deeply bizarre. One pair sold for 1,500. Another pair sold for 2,700. A third pair sold for 2,800. And the set sold for 3,400. 3,400. All right, lot number 156, a 2002 Teen Choice Award surfboard. Jordan, what is your answer?
I'm going to say $850.
$1,250.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Sharon's wig. Lot number 472.
About $8.
Close. 250.
Oh, that's cold. That's like, okay.
It is. And lastly, and this is my favorite, a photograph of Jane Fonda as Barbarella. Does not specify if it was signed. Jordan, what do you think it went for?
350.
$312.50.
Oh, I went over. Damn it.
Oh, boy. Anyway, in their defense, all that money went to Sharon's colon cancer nonprofit. So, very nice for them. Anyway, what ham goes up must come down.
That is right. Even though the money was still pouring in, by the end of the fourth season in 2005, the show was on its last legs. Executive producer Jeff Stilton was quoted in the Vice oral history as saying, "I don't know how we ultimately got 50 episodes out of it. It was limping along at the end, like a wounded animal hemorrhaging blood."
What a way with words.
I was going to say, what a very Ozzy-friendly analogy, I feel like.
Like a headless bat.
And that's when the family decided to go out on top. Sharon later said, "It would have destroyed our family if we'd gone on forever." And she told our kids, "This can't be your whole thing in life. You can't just be a person that's filmed every day. There's much more to who you are and what you want to do," which I feel like is a really strong, beautiful lesson that would very quickly be rendered obsolete by the next generation of reality stars and social media influencers who are filmed every day, and there's not a whole lot more to who they are or what they do. But it's a very nice thought, Sharon, so thank you for that.
Sharon was never more wrong than that until she was. But aside from providing the blueprint for an entire burgeoning genre of "this rich family has the same weird dynamic as your poor one," shows like Gene Simmons' Family Jewels, Hogan Knows Best, and Keeping Up with the Kardashians were the direct spawn of this show, really. The Osbournes also sent the family spiraling off into new and largely successful directions. Jack became a television producer and star, including a show that he did with his dad. Kelly eventually transitioned away from music after lightning failing to strike once, and she is now a television personality. Yeah, lightning didn't catch multiple times.
In case we do cut most of that, yeah, Heigl went off on a lengthy tangent about Kelly Osbourne's music career and then asked me to cut it for fear that she would dox him, as she did with the stylist who Ozzy cheated on her mother with.
But you can look up the statistics. They are out there, and they are grim. But she's been much more successful as an R&A personality. She was on Fashion Police, Project Runway Jr., and most recently and memorably competed on The Masked Singer. The Masked Singer.
I've still never seen that. I still don't understand that.
I prefer to think of it as like a glitch in the Matrix, like a machine just like knocked my head socket port like slightly out of whack, and I've just like hallucinated it. Sharon, meanwhile, launched a TV empire of her own. She appeared as a judge on America's Got Talent, X Factor. She was a contestant on Celebrity Apprentice, and she was on The Talk for many years until she decided to, and this is like, never get into a land war in Russia and never go to bat for Piers Morgan. She was defending Piers Morgan going after Meghan Markle and got into a heated exchange with her co-host Cheryl Underwood. It is some of the most awkward television I've ever seen in my life. And
we've just spent the last hour and a half talking about the Osbournes.
Yeah. And she quit the show 2 weeks later after the incident. It will presumably be costing CBS millions of dollars into the future. I'm sure she got some kind of walking away money for that. It was a real mess. But the most important thing to come out of this is that as of 2022, Ozzy has been sober for 8 years.
Good for him.
We must protect Ozzy. Black Sabbath was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006 for whatever that's worth. And he's got a tour scheduled to start in May 2023 because he is the Iron Man. God love him.
Hell yes.
God save Ozzy.
And while we're on the topic of Ozzy keeping on trucking, there have been rumors about an Osbournes reboot show. This started way back in 2014 when Sharon promised that they were due to start filming something in early 2015, and Kelly was asked about it in the press, and she said she was open to it, but it never materialized. Some people have speculated that maybe doing this show again would be triggering for Ozzy's sobriety. I'm not sure, but as of taping this episode, we are no closer to an Osbournes family reunion, which is, let's face it, probably for the best. The Osbournes, the show, it's just a snapshot of a time, both for the family and also for us as a country. There's a really interesting theory that Jack Osbourne shared, and he attributes a major portion of the success of the show was because it debuted fairly soon after 9/11, a few months later. And in this confusing time, people put on this show that was, very clearly intended as escapism. But as they watched this family that they assumed was absolutely nothing like their own in the slightest, they begin to have glimmers of self-recognition. And he said, in a way, this is a lot like our family. And Jack says, I think that provided a weird sense of comfort and solidarity in a kind of heady way. And he's also really grateful that the show exists because he likens the episodes to the greatest home videos anyone could ever ask for.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of the journey of the Osbournes. We've been musing on this for 90 minutes now. It is still eminently bizarre to me that not only did Ozzy Osbourne go from semi-washed up rock and roll wild man to America's wacky uncle from across the pond in one season of television for which he was dramatically underpaid, but that family reshaped modern American television essentially in their image. Jordan, in the end, it really is Ozzy's crazy train, and we're all just along for the ride.
Well, I think that's about all for the Osbournes. I'm tired, but it's a good kind of tired. Thank you for tuning into Too Much Information.
The 42 pills that Jordan took earlier today are finally kicking in. And like a ham launched by Sharon Osbourne across a fence, he's in low Earth orbit now. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Too Much Information. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. Thanks so much for listening. Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The supervising producer is Mike Johns.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.